You know, when Chloe and I decided to pack up our whole lives and move to Solitude, Alaska, we thought we were the luckiest people on Earth. We were running from the city, I guess. The noise, the rent, the feeling of being a sardine packed into a can with 8 million other sardines. We wanted quiet, we wanted space, we wanted something that was just ours. And Solitude, a tiny pinprick on the map, seemed to promise all of that. The cabin was perfect. It wasn't some ramshackle hut, it was a solid, handsome thing made of thick, dark logs, with a wide stone chimney and a porch that looked out over a sea of pine trees. The previous owners had left it in good shape. It felt sturdy, safe. In the first week, the snow fell so thick and fast that the whole world outside our windows turned into a soft, white blur. To us, that wasn't frightening, it was a blanket. It was exactly the kind of isolation we'd been dreaming of. We were completely cut off, and completely in love with it. My job was a big part of the dream. I'm a radio guy, always have been. The idea of being the late-night DJ for KSKM, the town's only station, felt like something out of an old movie. They called my 3-hour slot, the Solitude Signal. I loved that. I was the voice of the town while it slept. The station itself was just a small building on the edge of the main street, smelling faintly of stale coffee and old electronics. The equipment was analog, clunky, and beautiful. Big knobs, VU meters with warm, glowing needles, a microphone that looked like it had been broadcasting since the 50s. It was just me, a wall of vinyl records and cassettes, and the low hum of the transmitter, pushing my voice out into the frozen dark. Chloe, she fell into her own rhythm just as easily. She's a writer, and this place was like a shot of pure inspiration for her. She bought a thick, leather-bound journal before we left the city, and she started filling it from day one. I'd come home in the dead of night, the northern lights sometimes shimmering faintly over the treetops, and find her asleep on the sofa, her pen resting on a half-finished page. I'd read over her shoulder sometimes. She wrote about the way the snow muffled all sound, the blue tinge of the light at dusk, the startling red of a single cardinal against a white branch. She was capturing the peace we had found, bottling it up in ink. Those first few weeks were an absolute honeymoon. We'd spend the days exploring, getting our supplies from the town's one general store, meeting the handful of locals who all seemed ruggedly kind and minded their own business. We'd take long walks in the woods behind the cabin, our boots crunching on the packed snow. The silence out there was profound. It was a physical presence. You could feel it on your eardrums. We'd hold hands, our breath pluming in the frigid air, and just stand there, feeling like the only two people for 1,000 miles. "This is it, Liam," Chloe would whisper, her eyes shining. "This is home." At night, while I was at the station, she'd make the cabin her own. She hung old maps of Alaska on the walls, put up curtains, kept the fire roaring in the hearth. We'd talk on the phone during my long musical breaks. I'd be in my little booth, looking out at the empty, snow-lit street, and she'd be curled up in a big armchair by the fire, telling me about her day. It was our routine, our anchor. I was the voice broadcasting out into the quiet, and she was the warm, safe harbor I came back to. The night it started was just like any other. Cold, clear, with a million stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. I was about an hour into my show, playing some old folk tune, the kind of music that sounds right in a place like this. The request line lit up. Nothing unusual about that. I'd get calls from miners on the night shift, a lonely trucker passing through on the one major road, or just insomniacs looking for a bit of company. I faded the music down. "KSKM, the Solitude Signal, you're on the air." Nothing. Just dead air. I waited a second. "Hello? Anyone there?" Still silence. But it wasn't the silence of a dropped call. I could hear something. It was faint, but it was there. It was the sound of breathing. Slow, steady, and heavy. Like someone was holding the receiver right up to their mouth and just breathing into it. It wasn't panicked, not gasping. It was methodical. In, out. A deep, raspy sound. "All right, funny stuff," I said into the mic, forcing a chuckle into my voice. "If you want to make a request, you gotta use your words, friend." The breathing continued, unchanged. It was unnerving. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. It was probably just some bored kid, or a drunk guy who'd passed out holding the phone. I gave it another 5 seconds before cutting the line and shrugging it off. "Got a shy one on the line tonight, folks," I said, trying to make a joke of it for any listeners. "Let's get back to the music." I put on a long instrumental track and leaned back in my chair, but the quiet in the studio suddenly felt different. less peaceful. The sound of that heavy breathing seemed to linger in the air. At the same time, miles away in our cabin, Chloe was sitting at the big picture window in the living room, writing in her journal. The fire was crackling, the lamp beside her cast a warm, golden circle of light, and the rest of the house was in shadow. She told me later that she was writing about me, about my radio show, wondering who was out there listening in the vastness. And that's when she felt it. That primal, animal feeling of being watched. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a movement, it was just a sudden, cold certainty. She froze, her pen hovering over the page. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked out the window, past her own faint reflection in the glass, into the deep, inky blackness of the forest that bordered our property. And she saw him. It was just a shape, a silhouette against the snow in the dense stands of pine. A man. He was standing just at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the house. He was tall and thin, and utterly still. He wasn't moving, wasn't hiding. He was just standing there, a dark slash in the landscape, facing the house. Facing her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She told me she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare, locked in place by a fear so pure it was paralyzing. How long had he been there? Was he watching her write? Watching her move around the house? She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, a desperate, childish hope that when she opened them, he would be gone. A trick of the light. A shadow that looked like a man. She opened them. He was still there. That's when she broke. She scrambled for the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial my number at the station. It rang and rang. Of course, I was on air, in the middle of a song, unable to pick up. Panic clawed at her throat. She slammed the phone down and half yelled, half whispered my name, as if I could hear her all the way in town. Her final, desperate thought was to get me, to show me. To prove she wasn't crazy. She ran to the front door, flicked on the powerful porch light we'd installed, and threw the door open, ignoring the blast of freezing air. "Liam," she screamed into the night, her voice swallowed by the immense silence. She looked back toward the tree line. He was gone. The spot where the dark figure had stood was empty. There was nothing but snow and shadows. No footprints leading away, at least none she could see from the porch. It was as if he had simply dissolved back into the darkness. When I got home a couple of hours later, the porch light was still on. I found Chloe on the sofa, wrapped in a thick blanket, but she was shivering. The journal lay abandoned on the floor. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, shrugging off my heavy coat. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She told me everything, her voice small and trembling. The feeling of being watched. The tall, still figure at the edge of the woods, vanishing into thin air. I did what any loving, rational husband would do. I hugged her tight. I looked out the window myself into the dark, impenetrable wall of trees. I told her it was nothing. "Babe, it's so dark out there," I said, stroking her hair. "The way the shadows fall on the snow, the trees play tricks on your eyes. I've thought I've seen things a dozen times myself. It was probably just a weird-looking branch." "No, Liam," she insisted, pulling back to look at me, her eyes pleading. "It was a person. I know it was. He was watching me." Okay, I said softly, trying to soothe her. "I believe you felt you saw something. But think about it. Who would be standing out there in the woods, in the middle of the night, in this cold? It doesn't make any sense." I told her about the weird phone call, trying to make it a shared experience, to show her that strange things just happen out here. "Some joker with nothing better to do," I said with a laugh. "Maybe your shadow man and my heavy breather are partners in crime, trying to spook the new people in town." She didn't laugh. She just stared at me, a look of deep disappointment and fear on her face. I could see that I wasn't helping, that I was dismissing something that felt profoundly real and threatening to her. I held her close, kissed the top of her head, and flicked off the porch light. "Let's get to bed," I whispered. "Everything looks scarier in the dark. It's just us out here. Nobody else." She let me lead her to the bedroom without another word. But I found out much later, after everything had happened, what she wrote in her journal when she slipped out of bed that night. Reading those words now, knowing what was coming, it feels like ice filling my veins. "He doesn't believe me. I know what I saw. It wasn't a shadow, and there's something about that phone call he described, the breathing, it doesn't sound like a prank. It sounds like waiting." The silence became a routine. That's the strangest part. You'd think a person would never get used to something so unnerving, but the human brain is a weird machine. It finds patterns in everything, even in fear. Every night, somewhere between 10:30 and 11, the red light on the call-in line would blink to life. I'd let it blink a few times, a little knot tightening in my stomach. I'd put on a long song, something by a band no one had ever heard of, and take a deep breath before punching the button. KSKM, you're on the air. And then, nothing, just that same, familiar sound. The dead air wasn't truly dead. It was a live wire of static, and somewhere inside it, the sound of breathing. In, out. It was a slow, patient rhythm, like a sleeping giant. After a week of this, I stopped trying to joke about it on air. I'd just listen for a few seconds, feel the hair on my arms stand up, and then quietly disconnect the call before the song ended. No one ever mentioned it. Maybe they couldn't hear the breathing over their own radios, or maybe they just thought it was technical interference. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept me up, nobody else was listening at all. Life in the cabin got tense. The easy, comfortable silence we moved here for was gone. Now, the quiet felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Chloe became a ghost in our new home. I'd come back from the station in the early hours of the morning and find her not asleep on the sofa, but sitting in the dark, just staring out the big picture window into the black wall of trees. She'd jump at the sound of my key in the lock. "Did you see anything?" she'd whisper, her voice thin. "No, babe, just snow, just trees." I'd try to put my arms around her, but she was stiff, brittle. The warmth we used to share felt a million miles away. She was constantly checking the locks, peering through the curtains. The journal she used to write in, the one that was supposed to be filled with the beauty of this place, now sat closed on the nightstand, a bookmark sticking out of the same page for days. She was living inside her own fear, and I was locked out. I felt helpless, and if I'm being completely honest, I was starting to get annoyed. It felt like she was letting this nothing, ruin the dream we'd worked so hard to build. I still believed it was all in her head, a combination of isolation and a prankster on the phone line. I needed to believe that. Then came the night it all changed. It was a Tuesday. The snow was coming down again, not the gentle, fluffy kind, but a hard, driven sleet that ticked against the single window of the radio booth. The call came in at its usual time. I let the light blink, my jaw tight. I was tired of it. Tired of the fear, tired of the tension with Chloe, tired of this stupid, childish game. I was going to call him out. I faded the music down. KSKM, the solitude signal. You know, whoever you are, this is getting pretty old. My voice sounded steady, but my hand was shaking. If you've got something to say, say it. Otherwise, find a new hobby. The response was the usual heavy breathing. In, out. But this time, I held the line open. I was going to outlast him. I leaned into the mic, my face inches from the foam covering. The studio was silent except for the low hum of the transmitter and the sleet against the glass. The breathing on the other end continued, completely unfazed by my little speech. Patient, and then, through the static, something else came through. It was faint, distorted, like a voice coming from the bottom of a well. A whisper. Liam. That was it. Just my name. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was just a statement of fact. A sound that said, I know who you are. My blood went cold. It was a physical sensation, like ice water being poured down my spine. This wasn't a random prank. This wasn't a wrong number. This was personal. This was for me. I slammed my hand down on the disconnect button so hard the console rattled. I ripped my headphones off and threw them onto the desk. The silence in the studio was suddenly suffocating. I stood up and paced the small room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He knew my name. The anonymous, heavy-breathing man on the phone knew my name. I felt watched, even in my little concrete box in the middle of a sleeping town. I finished my shift on autopilot, my mind a mess of fear and paranoia. Every shadow on the drive home looked like a man standing on the side of the road. The next morning, the world was white and clean. The sleet had turned back to snow overnight, leaving a fresh, pristine blanket over everything. It almost made me feel like I'd imagined the whole thing. The fear felt less real in the bright morning light. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, trying to act normal for Chloe's sake. She was quiet, moving around like she was made of glass. Then she screamed. It wasn't a loud, horror movie shriek. It was a short, sharp, terrified gasp that cut right through me. I dropped the coffee pot, hot liquid splashing across the floor, and ran to the front of the house. She was standing at the open front door, one hand clamped over her mouth, staring down at the porch. The cold air rushed in around her. What is it? I asked, pushing past her. And then I saw it. There, on the dark fibers of our welcome mat, was a bird. A small, dark bird, maybe a finch or a sparrow. It was dead, that much was obvious. But it wasn't just lying there. Its body was perfectly centered on the mat. And its wings had been pulled out, stretched wide and pinned to its sides somehow, so it looked like it was frozen in a perfect, unnatural state of flight. It was a deliberate arrangement. A grotesque little sculpture. A message. Chloe started crying, not loudly, but with awful, silent sobs, her whole body shaking. Liam, she choked out, pointing a trembling finger. It's him, the man in the woods. My first instinct, my stupid, rational, make it all better instinct, took over. Honey, no, it's probably just an owl or something. It must have dropped it. Dropped it? She snapped, her voice suddenly sharp with anger through her tears. Look at it, Liam. Does that look like an owl dropped it? It's been posed. It's for us. Don't you see? The man watching, the calls. It's all connected. I looked from the bird back to her face, which was pale and desperate. A part of me, a deep, primal part, was screaming that she was right. The meticulous placement of the bird, my name whispered over the radio, it was too much to be a coincidence. But another part of me, the part that wanted our peaceful life back, the part that couldn't bear to see her this terrified, refused to accept it. Okay, maybe it's not an owl, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Maybe it's some local kids. Some teenagers trying to spook the new people from the city. It's a sick prank, Chloe, that's all. She just stared at me. The look in her eyes, it wasn't just fear anymore. It was a deep, bottomless disappointment. It was the look of someone realizing they are utterly and completely alone. She wasn't just scared of the man in the woods anymore. She was scared, and she was facing it by herself, because her husband refused to see what was right in front of him. You don't believe me, she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. I believe that you're scared, I said, reaching for her. She flinched away from my touch. And I don't blame you. But we can't let them win. We can't let some stupid prank run us out of our home. I grabbed a shovel from the side of the house, scooped up the little bird and the mat it was on, and threw the whole thing into the woods as far as I could. An empty, symbolic gesture. When I came back inside, Chloe was gone. I found her in the bedroom, packing a small bag. What are you doing? I asked, my voice cracking. I'm going to stay at the motel in town for a night, she said, not looking at me. I can't be here tonight. Not alone. The chasm between us had never felt wider. I had failed her. I drove her into town in silence, the unspoken accusations hanging thick in the air. I dropped her off, told her I loved her, and watched her walk into the generic, brightly lit motel lobby without looking back. That night, at the station, the dread was a physical weight. The booth felt like a cage. I was alone, Chloe was alone, and our home was empty, waiting. I debated not even doing the show, just putting on a tape and going to the motel to be with her. But some stubborn part of me, the part that still insisted this was all a misunderstanding, told me I had to go on. To show I wasn't scared. The call came at 10:48. Earlier than usual, the red light blinked like a bloodshot eye. I let it blink. A minute passed. 2 minutes. My shift was almost over. I could just ignore it. Just let it go. But I couldn't. I had to know. I put on a 7-minute instrumental track, took a shaky breath, and punched the button. Hello? I said, my voice barely a whisper. The familiar, heavy breathing filled my ears. In, out, in, out. I didn't say anything else. I just sat there, listening, my knuckles white on the console. Let's get this over with, I thought. Just do your creepy breathing and hang up. But this time was different. After about 30 seconds of silence and breathing, another sound started. A faint, tinny hiss, like an old cassette tape being played over the phone line. Then came a small, metallic clinking sound. I recognized it immediately. It was the sound of a spoon stirring inside a ceramic mug. Our ceramic mugs. And then, I heard a voice. My own. The recording was clear as day. Honey, where'd you put the sugar? The breath caught in my throat. My entire body went rigid. The sounds that followed were just as clear. Chloe's muffled reply from the other room, the sound of my footsteps on our kitchen floorboards, the scrape of the cabinet door opening. That was this morning. That was our private conversation. In our kitchen, while we were making coffee, just before Chloe found the bird. He hadn't just called me. He hadn't just watched the house. He had been listening. He was inside, or he had a way to get inside. The microphone wasn't on a phone line. It was in our home. The breathing on the other end of the line stopped. It was replaced by a soft click as the caller hung up. But I was no longer listening. I sat there, frozen, staring at the soundproof walls of the studio, but all I could see was our little cabin in the woods. The unlocked windows, the old back door, the vast, dark forest pressing in on all sides. He'd been in our house. Maybe he was still there. And Chloe was all alone in a motel room miles away. Or was she? The thought hit me like a physical blow. Did he know where she was? For the first time since this all began, the fog of denial cleared, replaced by the stark, blinding clarity of pure terror. We weren't being pranked, we were being hunted, and I had left her all alone. I don't remember the drive home from the station. Not really. It's a blank spot in my memory, a 10-minute stretch of road wiped clean and replaced with pure, white-hot adrenaline. All I know is that 1 second I was staring at the dead console, the ghost of my own voice echoing in the silent studio, and the next I was skidding to a halt in our driveway, the pickup's engine still screaming. The house was dark, just a silhouette against the snow and the endless night. My first thought, the only coherent one I could form, was Chloe. My fingers were numb and clumsy as I fumbled for my phone. It took 3 tries to dial the motel's number. The ringing on the other end felt like an eternity. Solitude Inn, how can I help you? A tired, gravelly voice. I need to speak to Chloe Williams. Room 12. My voice was a ragged croak. A pause. The rustle of paper. Let's see. Yeah, I got a Chloe Williams. Hang on. The click of the phone being put down. The faint, tinny sound of another phone ringing in the background. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Please pick up. Please be there. Please be okay. Hello? Her voice. It was thin, sleepy, but it was hers. Relief washed over me so hard my knees almost buckled. Chloe, it's me. Liam, what's wrong? It's past 2 in the morning. Nothing. I wanted to hear your voice. Are you okay? Is the door locked? Yes, of course, the door is locked. Liam, you're scaring me. What happened? How could I tell her? How could I tell her over the phone that our home, our safe place, had been violated in a way I couldn't even comprehend? That the man on the phone wasn't just a voice, but an ear pressed against our lives? It's nothing, babe. I'm sorry. I was wrong. You were right all along. The words came out in a rush, a pathetic confession in the freezing air. I was so stupid. Just stay there. Keep the door locked. I'll come get you in the morning. I love you. I love you too, she said, but her voice was full of a cautious confusion I knew I'd put there. I hung up and just stood there for a second in the crunching snow, staring at the cabin. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a trap. The next hour was a blur of frantic, clumsy activity. I wasn't a handyman, not by a long shot, but fear is a powerful teacher. I found the toolbox we'd barely touched since we moved in and went to work. I drove screws into the tops of every single window frame, sealing them shut. I found an old, heavy-duty slide bolt in a dusty box of hardware left by the previous owner and, after 10 minutes of cursing and splintered wood, managed to attach it to the inside of the front door. The back door got the same treatment. The noise of the drill was obscene in the dead silence of the night, a desperate protest against the quiet that surrounded us. With every screw I drove in, I felt a tiny, pathetic flare of control. See? I was doing something. I was making a safe. I drove back into town as the sun was just beginning to bruise the eastern sky with shades of purple and gray. Chloe was waiting for me in the motel lobby, the small bag at her feet. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. She didn't say anything when she got in the truck, just looked at me, her eyes searching my face. I believe you, I said again, my hands gripping the steering wheel. And I am so sorry. She just nodded, a small, tight movement, and turned to watch the snowy landscape pass by. When we got back to the cabin, I showed her the new locks, the screwed shut windows. I walked her through it like a real estate agent showing off security features. She just touched the cold metal of the new bolt on the door, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I think we both allowed ourselves to breathe. We were sealed in. He was locked out. The relief lasted less than 24 hours. The next afternoon, she went to get a log for the fire from the pile on the porch. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when I heard that sound again. The same sound she'd made when she found the bird. A short, sharp intake of breath, a gasp that wasn't loud but was so full of dread it turned my blood to ice. I ran to the door. She was standing there, pointing. Liam. This time, it was resting right on the top step, placed neatly in the center as if it were a delivery. It was a single glove. A child's glove, made of faded wool that might have been blue once. It was small, grubby, and frayed at the fingertips, as if it had been worn for a whole winter of building snowmen and having snowball fights, a lifetime ago. It was the most innocent, mundane thing in the world. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I didn't offer any stupid explanations this time. There were none. An owl doesn't drop a neatly placed child's glove. This wasn't a prank. This was a message getting clearer and more menacing each time. It felt like he was leaving us pieces of a forgotten, tragic story. That's it, I said, my voice harder than I intended. That's it. We're getting cameras. Chloe looked at me, a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe just shared terror, in her eyes. You think they'll help? They can't hurt, I said. I'll get them today. The nearest town with a proper electronics store was a 2-hour drive away. I made the trip in record time. I bought 2 wireless, motion-activated security cameras. The best they had. One was for the front porch, aimed directly at the door and the steps. The other I positioned on the corner of the cabin, giving me a wide-angle view of the driveway and the edge of the tree line where Chloe swore she'd seen the figure. Setting them up gave us a purpose. It felt like we were fighting back. We connected them to an old laptop, and suddenly, the dark, menacing world outside our windows was contained in 2 small, manageable squares on a screen. We could see the porch. We could see the woods. The little red recording light on the camera feed was like a tiny, digital guard dog. That night, for the first time in what felt like a month, we didn't feel like prey. We watched a movie, the laptop open on the coffee table, a constant, reassuring eye on the darkness. We went to bed feeling, not safe, exactly, but safer. We had taken back a little bit of control. It was a lie, of course. A story we told ourselves so we could get some sleep. The next morning, we woke up to a world that seemed peaceful. The sun was out, glinting off the new snow. I made coffee, Chloe made toast. We were deliberately, almost desperately, normal. It was a fragile truce, and we both knew it. After breakfast, I went to the laptop to check the overnight recordings, mostly just to reassure myself. Anything? Chloe asked from the kitchen. Nope, just a whole lot of nothing. Some deer around 4:30, that's it. She came over and peered at the screen, a cup of tea in her hands. She reached for the front door, her other hand on the new slide bolt. I'm just going to grab some mail. Her voice trailed off. She froze, her hand hovering over the lock. She was staring through the small pane of glass in the upper half of the door. What? I said, my stomach tightening. She didn't answer. She just slowly backed away from the door, her eyes wide. I pushed my chair back and went to look. Hanging on the door, suspended from the knocker, was a wreath. It wasn't a Christmas wreath. It was a rough, circular thing, maybe a foot in diameter, woven from bare, thorny twigs. Stuck into the tangled branches were small, dark feathers, the same kind as the bird we had found. It was another one of his sculptures. A crown of thorns for our house. No, I whispered, my eyes flicking from the wreath to the laptop screen. No, that's impossible. I scrambled back to the computer, Chloe right behind me. I just checked it. I just watched the whole night. I pulled up the feed from the front porch camera. I scrubbed through the timeline again, my hand shaking on the mouse. There was the footage from when we went to bed. There was the empty, snow-dusted porch, illuminated by the camera's infrared night vision. There was nothing. I dragged the timeline forward, hour by hour. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., nothing but still, silent, empty porch. Then I got to 3 o'clock. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the image dissolved into a blizzard of black and white static. Just noise. A loud, hissing sound came from the laptop's speakers. It stayed that way for 5 solid minutes. Then, at 3:19 a.m., the picture snapped back into perfect, clear view. And the wreath was there, hanging on the door, swaying slightly in the wind. What the hell? Chloe breathed. Rewind it. Play it again. I did. It was the same. A perfect recording, a 5-minute block of pure static, and then a perfect recording with the wreath now in place. I switched to the other camera, the one aimed at the tree line. The same thing. At 3:14 a.m., the feed cut to static. At 3:19 a.m., it returned. He hadn't just evaded the cameras. He knew they were there. He had found a way to disable them, to blind our digital eyes for the exact amount of time he needed to walk up to our front door, hang his grotesque trophy, and disappear back into the trees without a trace. The feeling of control, of safety, evaporated. It was worse than before. Before, he was a ghost in the woods. Now, he was a technician. A ghost in the machine. He was smarter than us. He was always one step ahead. We looked at each other, the silence in the room filled with the unspoken truth. The locks wouldn't save us. The cameras wouldn't save us. We were trapped in a fishbowl, and the person watching us could tap on the glass whenever he wanted. "We have to go to the police," Chloe said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It wasn't a suggestion, it was the last move on the board. The police station in Solitude was little more than a front room in the same building as the town hall. The man behind the desk was older, maybe mid-60s, with a thick gray mustache and a weary look in his eyes that suggested he'd seen every kind of small-town trouble there was. A small plaque on his desk read, "Chief Miller." He listened. He leaned back in his squeaky chair and listened to the whole story. The calls, the whispered name, the bird, the glove, the wreath, the corrupted camera footage. I tried to lay it all out logically, to sound like a rational, sane person reporting a crime. Chloe sat beside me, silent, twisting her hands in her lap. When I finished, Chief Miller took a long, slow sip from a stained coffee mug. He set it down with a soft clink. "Son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You've been up here what, 2 months now?" "About that, yes," I said. "It's a big change, coming up here from the city. The quiet, it gets to people. The dark, gets in your head." He gestured vaguely at the window. "We get a lot of it up here. Call it cabin fever. Your mind starts playing tricks on you. You see things that ain't there, hear things that ain't there." My jaw tightened. "This isn't cabin fever, Chief. We have physical evidence. The things left on our porch. I have the camera footage on my laptop in the truck." He held up a hand. "And I'm sure you do. Look, it's probably some local kids. They see a new couple from the city, think it's funny to spook you. As for the cameras, this new wireless stuff, it's unreliable. Interference from the mountains, solar flares, who knows? It cuts out, happens all the time." He leaned forward, trying to sound fatherly. "My advice? Get some rest. Both of you. Try and get out a bit more during the day. Don't let a bunch of bored teenagers ruin this beautiful place for you." Disappointment felt like a physical weight in my chest. He wasn't listening. He had already decided what this was. He had a neat little box labeled "Crazy City Folk," and he'd already put us inside it. There was no arguing, no convincing him. He had made up his mind before we'd even finished talking. "Thank you for your time, Chief," Chloe said, standing up abruptly. She walked out without a backward glance. I just nodded, mumbled a thanks, and followed her out into the cold brightness of the afternoon. We were alone, totally, completely, and utterly alone. As we got into the truck, I looked back at the station. Chief Miller was standing at the window, watching us leave. His face was unreadable. Then, he turned his head and looked past us, his gaze settling on the dark, massive wall of the forest that ringed the town on all sides. He let out a long, slow breath that fogged up the glass, a sigh that seemed to carry more weight than just the dismissal he'd given us. It was a look I couldn't decipher, but it scared me more than anything else that had happened so far. It wasn't the look of a man who thought we were crazy. It was the look of a man who was tired of a story he'd heard before. The drive back from the police station was the quietest we'd ever been. It was a thick, heavy silence, the kind that presses in on you, makes it hard to breathe. We didn't talk about Chief Miller. We didn't talk about the wreath or the cameras or what we were going to do next. There was nothing left to say. We had followed the rules, played the game, asked for help from the people who were supposed to give it. And we'd been patted on the head and sent away like a couple of hysterical children seeing monsters under the bed. The thing is, our monster was real. He just happened to be smarter than our locks and invisible tar cameras. Life in the cabin changed after that. It wasn't a home anymore, it was a fortress, and we were its prisoners. We moved the laptop with the camera feeds to the kitchen counter, where it stayed on 24 hours a day. It became the first thing we looked at in the morning and the last thing we checked at night. We'd watch the two little black and white squares showing our empty porch and the silent tree line, just waiting. The worst part was, we didn't even know what we were waiting for. We just knew it was coming. Chloe retreated further into herself. She spent hours writing in that journal of hers, curled up on the sofa, her knees pulled up to her chest. I'd see her from the kitchen, scribbling furiously, then stopping to just stare into the fire for a long time. I knew she was documenting everything, every creak of the house, every shadow that flickered at the edge of her vision. She was building a case file that no one but her would ever read. She stopped suggesting we leave. I think she knew, on some level, what I was beginning to understand. It wouldn't matter where we went. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about us. I had to keep going to work. The bills didn't care that we were living in a low-budget horror movie. The drive to the KSKM station, which once felt like a peaceful escape, now felt like an act of abandonment. Every time I left, I'd look at Chloe standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, and a cold dread would coil in my gut. I'd make her promise to keep the slide bolts on both doors locked until I got back. It was a stupid, flimsy ritual, but it was all we had. We both knew those bolts hadn't stopped him from putting that wreath on our door. The next few nights at the station were silent. The special line didn't ring. I almost wished it would. The silence, now, was worse. It was a loaded silence, full of possibility. Every time a song ended, I'd brace myself, my eyes fixed on that phone. Nothing. It felt like he was letting the last message sink in. The message from the police station was clear. No one is coming to help you. The message from the wreath and the static-filled recordings was even clearer. I can get to you whenever I want. It was about a week after the visit to Chief Miller that I finally broke. I was at the station, halfway through my shift. The snow had started up again, fat, wet flakes that stuck to the studio window and muffled the world outside. I was playing some old folk tune, staring at the console, at the phone, at my own reflection in the dark glass. A wave of absolute, hopeless rage washed over me. It was so intense it made my hands shake. We were just living here, waiting for the next dead bird, the next creepy trinket, the next violation. We were mice in a cage, and the owner was bored, tapping on the glass just to watch us jump. I don't know what snapped. Maybe it was the memory of Chloe's face that morning, so pale and drawn. Maybe it was the thought of Chief Miller's dismissive smile. Or maybe it was just the crushing, suffocating weight of the fear. I made a decision. It was a stupid decision. I know that now, I probably knew it then. But when you're out of good ideas, the bad ones start to look pretty damn appealing. The song was ending. I didn't have another one queued up. I let the track fade into silence. Dead air, the cardinal sin of radio. I didn't care. I leaned forward, my mouth so close to the microphone I could feel the cold metal of the pop filter against my lips. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The on-air light was a malevolent red eye staring back at me. I'm going to interrupt the music for a minute, I said. My voice sounded strange, thin and tight. I cleared my throat. I have a message for one of my listeners. You know who you are. You call here a lot. I paused. The only sound in the entire town of Solitude right then was the hum of the broadcast equipment and my own ragged breathing. I don't know who you are, I continued, the words coming faster now, fueled by a cocktail of terror and fury. I don't know what you want from us. I don't know what we ever did to you. But this has to stop. Whatever this game is, it's over. Just leave us alone. Please, just leave Chloe and me alone. I let go of the talk button and leaned back in my chair, my body trembling. I felt exposed, naked. I had just used the only public broadcast channel for 100 miles to plead with a monster. I felt like an idiot. A desperate, terrified idiot. For a long minute, there was nothing. Just the hiss of dead air. I imagined the few dozen people still awake in Solitude, listening in their warm homes or their trucks, wondering what the hell was wrong with the new DJ from the city. I was about to apologize, to put on a song and pretend it never happened, when it happened. The private line rang, just once, a shrill, electronic shriek that cut through the silence and went straight for my spine. My hand shot out and hovered over the receiver. This was it. He was going to talk. He was going to tell me what he wanted, or threaten me, or laugh at me. Anything was better than the silence. My fingers closed around the cold plastic. I lifted it to my ear. Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was no breathing this time. No static. Instead, a sound came through the earpiece. It was a recording, I could tell by the faint hiss underneath. It was the sound of someone crying. Not loud, hysterical crying. It was the other kind. The quiet, hopeless kind. Soft, hitching sobs, the sound of someone trying to cry without making any noise, a sound of deeply private, absolute grief. It was the sound of a woman's heart breaking. My blood didn't just run cold. It stopped. My entire circulatory system just ceased to function. I knew that sound. My mind flew back to the night before. I had gotten up to get a glass of water around midnight. As I passed the living room, I saw Chloe. She was curled on the sofa, bathed in the soft orange glow of the dying embers in the fireplace. Her journal was open on her lap, a pen in her hand. Her shoulders were shaking, an almost imperceptible tremor. I'd stood there in the dark hall, watching her, and I heard it. That exact same sound, the sound of her silently weeping over the words she was writing, over the fear that had taken over our lives. I hadn't gone in, I didn't know what to say, and I felt like I was intruding on a moment of private sorrow. I just went back to bed, my own heart aching for her. My eyes darted around the empty studio, but I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing my living room, the sofa, the fireplace, the dark corner by the bookshelf where a person could stand, unseen from the hallway. That sound, it wasn't made over a phone line. It wasn't someone holding a phone up to a crying person. The quality was too clear, too close. It was recorded, from up close, from inside the room. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The man who called the station. The man who stood at the edge of the woods. The man who left the bird and the glove and the wreath. The man who could make our cameras go to static. They weren't a team. It wasn't a town-wide conspiracy. It was one person, and he had been inside our house. Last night, while Chloe was crying on the sofa, while I was in the other room, he had been there, standing in the shadows of our living room with a tape recorder, capturing the most intimate, painful sound of my wife's despair. The locks meant nothing, the screwed shut windows meant nothing. He had a way in. He had been inside our sanctuary, breathing our air, walking on our floors. The sobs on the phone ended. A click. He'd hung up. I didn't think. There was no room for thought. There was only a primal, white-hot scream of terror that took over my entire being. Chloe, she was at home, alone, in that house. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't sign off. I tore the headphones from my head and threw them onto the console. I fumbled for the microphone switch one last time. KSKM is experiencing, unexpected technical difficulties. I stammered into the mic, my voice unrecognizable. We're going off the air. I slammed the power button on the main board, plunging the entire station into silence. I stumbled out of my chair, knocking it over with a clatter that echoed in the dead room. I burst through the studio door, ran through the small lobby, and shoved my way out into the night. The cold was a shock, and the snow was coming down hard now, a thick, blinding curtain of white. It didn't matter. I sprinted to my pickup, my fingers numb and clumsy on the key. The engine roared to life. I threw it in drive, stomped on the gas, and the truck fishtailed wildly on the icy road before finding purchase. I was flying down the dark, empty road back to the cabin, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. My world narrowed to a single, frantic, repeating thought. I have to get to her. I have to get home. The world outside my truck was a churning vortex of white. Snow didn't fall, it attacked, coming at the windshield from every direction at once. The wipers were fighting a war they couldn't win, thumping a frantic, useless rhythm against the glass. For every swipe that cleared a momentary patch of vision, a fresh sheet of blinding white slapped back over it. The engine screamed in a low gear, tires spinning, searching for a grip on the ice I couldn't even see. My hands were clamped to the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were bloodless. I was driving on memory and raw panic, tracing a road that had ceased to exist. My mind wasn't working right. It was just a loop, a single track playing over and over. He was in the house. He was in the house with her. He recorded her crying. The sound of her quiet sobs, broadcast through the station's private line, was burned into my ears. It was more terrifying than any scream. It was intimate. It was a violation so profound I didn't have a name for it. The monster wasn't at the tree line anymore. He wasn't a disembodied voice on the phone. He had walked through our home. He had stood in the shadows of our living room, breathing our air, while she wept. And I had been in the next room, oblivious. The truck fishtailed, the rear end swinging wide into the blackness. I wrenched the wheel, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a second, I thought I was going into the ditch, into the endless pines and the snow that would bury the truck in an hour. But the tires caught, lurching me back onto what I prayed was the road. My only thought was Chloe. Alone, in that house, with him, or, God, maybe he was still there. That thought was a physical thing, a shard of ice twisting in my gut. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The 10-minute drive from the station felt like it was taking a lifetime. Every shape in the blizzard became a threat. A leaning tree was a figure about to step into the road. A snowdrift was a car blocking my path. My own headlights reflecting off the swirling flakes created ghosts that danced just at the edge of my vision. I was losing it. I was just another panicked husband, driving too fast in a storm, about to become a headline on some other DJ's morning show. But I couldn't slow down. To slow down felt like surrendering her. Then, through the chaos, a flicker. A faint, familiar shape. The turnoff. I almost missed it. I slammed on the brakes, the anti-lock system chattering violently as the truck slid sideways, finally lurching to a stop just past the entrance to our long driveway. I didn't care. I threw it in reverse, backed up, and pointed the truck down the final stretch. The headlights cut a tunnel through the trees, illuminating a world buried in white. And then I saw it. The cabin. The lights were out. Every light. The porch light we always left on. The warm glow from the living room windows. It was just a dark, silent hulk against the snow. My blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. A new kind of silence fell over me, an internal one, drowning out the engine and the storm. A terrible, calm certainty settled in my chest. I was too late. I left the truck running, headlights blasting towards the house, and stumbled out into the knee-deep snow. The wind ripped at me, a physical force that tried to push me back. It felt like the world itself didn't want me to get to the front door. Chloe, I screamed, but the wind snatched the name from my lips and tore it to shreds. It was a useless gesture. The front door was open. Just a crack, but it was open. Snow had drifted in, forming a pale, silent wedge on the welcome mat and the wooden floor beyond. The cold air pouring out from the house was different from the cold of the storm. It was a dead, still cold. The cold of an empty space. I pushed the door open. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely pull my phone from my pocket. I fumbled with the flashlight app, the little icon seeming to mock me. Finally, a weak beam cut through the oppressive darkness. Chloe? My voice was a choked whisper. It sounded pathetic in the huge silence of the house. Nothing. Not a floorboard creak, not a sigh, not the rustle of a blanket. Just the howl of the wind outside and the frantic, useless beat of my own heart. The flashlight beam trembled, dancing across the familiar room. The sofa, the cold, black maw of the fireplace, the bookshelf. Everything was in its place, but it felt desecrated, like a crime scene. The air was thick with what had happened here. I could feel it, the panic, the fear. I swept the light across the floor, and there it was, her journal. It was lying open on the floor near the sofa, its pages ruffled by the draft from the open door. It looked like it had been dropped. I think a part of me knew, right then, that reading it was going to be the worst moment of my life. But I had to. It was the only voice left in the house. I knelt, the cold of the floor seeping through my jeans. The beam from my phone shook as I aimed it at the open page. Her handwriting, usually so neat and controlled, was a frantic, jagged scrawl. The ink was smeared in places, as if by a tear or a panicked, damp hand. I started to read. The power just went out. All at once. Not a flicker, just gone. The storm, probably, but Liam isn't back yet and the generator hasn't kicked on. Total darkness. Total silence, except for the wind. It sounds like it's trying to tear the roof off. There was a sound, outside, on the porch. I'm trying to tell myself it's the wind. A branch hitting the deck. But it wasn't a scrape or a bang. It was a footstep. I heard it. A single, heavy crunch in the snow on the porch steps. I'm not breathing. I've been sitting here on the sofa for I don't know how long, just listening. I can't hear anything over the wind now. Maybe I imagined it. God, I hope I imagined it. I should go to the door, check the bolt. But I can't. I can't make myself move. My legs feel like they're filled with cement. I'm just staring at the door in the dark. Oh God, no. The doorknob. It's turning. Slowly. So slowly. I can hear the click of the mechanism. Back and forth. He's testing it. He knows I'm in here. The bolt. I'm an idiot. We put the new slide bolt on, but he knows about that. He must know. He put the wreath there. This is it. This is really happening. My own breathing had stopped. I was reading a real-time account of my wife's terror, and I was utterly helpless, trapped in the past by a few inches of paper and ink. I forced my eyes to the next paragraph. I'm not going to sit here and wait. I can't. The loose floorboard, the one under the rug by the fireplace. The one we found when we moved in, from the old cellar they filled in. It's small, but maybe I can fit. It's my only chance. My only way out is to go down. He's at the back door now. I can hear him. Same thing. Jiggling the handle. He's checking his ways in. I have to go. I have to go now. The last entry was a few lines, crammed at the bottom of the page, the letters barely legible, as if written in absolute, final terror. He's in the house. I heard the lock give. I'm under the floor. It's so dark. I can hear him walking. Right above my head. Please hurry, Liam. I love you. A sound escaped my throat. A strangled, guttural noise of grief and rage. I hadn't been here. I had been on the radio, pleading with the very monster who was closing in on her. I had left her alone to face this. The journal slipped from my numb fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. I was kneeling there in the dark, in the house where he'd been, my eyes fixed on the rug by the fireplace. Under the floor. She was under the floor. I scrambled over to the rug, my hands tearing at it, pulling it aside. The rough, wooden planks of the floor were cold and solid. I ran my hands over them, desperately searching for the edge of the loose board she'd written about. My fingers were clumsy, stupid with cold and fear. Where was it? Was I in the right spot? Had he found her? Then I heard it. It was the faintest sound, almost nothing. A tiny, wooden scrape, coming from directly beneath the floorboards where my hands were resting. It was so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen over the wind. There it was again, a soft, hesitant creak. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't a rat. It was a sound made by a person trying not to make a sound. Chloe. A wave of dizzying, impossible relief washed over me. It was so powerful it almost buckled my knees. She was alive. She was right there, beneath my feet. She was alive. I opened my mouth to whisper her name, to tell her it was me, that she was safe. But before any sound could come out, another floorboard creaked. Not from beneath me, from the dark, yawning mouth of the hallway. Right behind me. It was a different sound. Heavier, more deliberate, the sound of a heavy weight settling on old wood. He was still in the house. And he had heard it, too. Time didn't stretch. It just broke. My entire world, my entire consciousness, snapped down to 2 points. A scrape from below the floor. A creak from the hallway behind me. Chloe, the monster, both here, both aware of each other. My brain was a circuit with too much power, and the fuse just blew. For a full second, I was just a statue of a man kneeling in the dark, my phone's weak light illuminating a patch of dusty floor. The decision was made for me. A huge shape detached itself from the deeper darkness of the hall. It didn't rush. It moved with a terrifying, unhurried purpose. I couldn't see a face, just a silhouette that blocked out the faint moonlight from the bedroom window at the end of the hall. It was big, bigger than I'd imagined. The phone fell from my hand, skittering across the floor and casting wild, dancing shadows that made the room a nightmare carousel. Instinct, not thought, took over. I scrambled backwards, my hands slapping against the cold wood, trying to get my feet under me. Chloe, stay down, I yelled, my voice cracking. The figure didn't make a sound. No grunt, no threat. Just the rustle of heavy fabric and the soft thud of boots on the floorboards as it closed the distance. I got to my feet, my back hitting the cold stone of the fireplace. There was nowhere to go. I grabbed the first thing my hand found on the mantel, a heavy, glass photo frame. It was a picture of us, from our wedding day. He was on me before I could even properly swing it. A hand, huge and rough as bark, clamped around my wrist. It didn't just stop my arm, it crushed it. The pressure was unbelievable, bones ground together. I cried out as the frame dropped from my numb fingers, shattering on the hearth. His other hand shot out and grabbed the front of my jacket, lifting me half off the ground and slamming me back against the stone. The impact knocked the wind out of me in a sharp, painful gasp. My head connected with the mantelpiece, and for a terrifying second, the room went fuzzy with stars. I was fighting for my life in near total darkness against a silent giant. I thrashed, kicking, punching, but it was like hitting a brick wall. He was impossibly strong, an animal. He just absorbed the blows without a grunt, his grip tightening, a low, steady pressure building in my throat where he held my jacket bunched up. I could feel his breath on my face, hot and stale, and I could hear it. That same, steady, labored breathing from the phone. It was the only sound he made, a human engine of pure malevolence. My vision was starting to tunnel. Black spots danced at the edges. I was losing. I was going to die here, on the floor of my own home, listening to this thing breathe. My last thought was a stupid, pointless apology to Chloe. I'd brought this here, I had led him right to our door, and then the floor next to us just erupted. It wasn't a gentle lift. A floorboard blasted upwards with a crack of splintering wood. A shape, wild and pale, clawed its way out of the blackness below. It was Chloe. Her face was a white mask of terror in the gloom, her hair matted with dirt and cobwebs. She looked feral, and in her hands she held the long, black iron poker from the fireplace set. The man, this silent thing, was so focused on me he didn't even seem to register her at first. He just turned his head slightly, as if mildly curious about the noise. Chloe didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. With a guttural sob that was part rage and part terror, she raised the poker high over her head with both hands and brought it down with all the force in her body. The sound it made was nothing like in the movies. It wasn't a clean thwack. It was a wet, sickening, dense thump. The sound of heavy iron meeting a human skull. The giant's grip on me vanished. It was like a switch had been flipped. All the impossible strength just evaporated. He made a soft, sighing sound, the first real noise I'd heard from him besides his breathing, and crumpled. He didn't fall gracefully. He just collapsed in on himself, a heap of wet winter clothes landing with a heavy thud on the floor. He lay completely still. Silence. The roar of the blizzard outside seemed to rush back in to fill the void. Chloe stood over him, the poker still clutched in her hands, her whole body shaking in violent, uncontrollable tremors. I was still propped against the fireplace, gasping for air, the pattern of the stone pressed into my back. We just stared at each other for a long moment, two survivors in the wreckage. Then her composure broke, and a dry, ragged sob escaped her lips. I pushed myself off the wall and stumbled towards her, my legs like jelly. We clung to each other, right there, next to the unmoving body of the man who had tried to destroy us. We didn't say anything. There were no words. There was only the feeling of her shaking in my arms, the cold of the room, and the heavy, metallic smell that was starting to fill the air. It took us a few minutes to start thinking again. Logic came back in slow, painful waves. We couldn't stay here. My phone's light was still on, pointing at the ceiling. I picked it up. With shaking hands, I pointed the beam at the man on the floor. He was lying face down. Dark hair, matted with snow and now with blood. He was wearing a thick, old-fashioned canvas coat. He was just a man. A big, unconscious, bleeding man. The rope, I managed to say, my voice a raw croak. In the truck. For firewood. Chloe just nodded, her eyes wide and glassy. The next 10 minutes were a blur of numb, mechanical action. We were operating on pure adrenaline and shock. I found the rope in my truck bed. We tied his hands behind his back, then his feet. We worked in silence, our movements clumsy and uncoordinated. It felt surreal, like a dream. We rolled him onto an old tarp we kept by the door, and together, we dragged him out onto the porch and, with a monumental effort, hoisted his dead weight into the bed of my pickup. We didn't speak. We didn't look at his face. He was just a problem to be moved. An object. We got in the cab of the truck, the headlights still cutting a path through the swirling snow. Chloe locked her door. I locked mine. We just sat there for a second, the heater blasting, the wipers thumping their frantic rhythm. I looked at her. Her cheek was smudged with dirt, her eyes were bottomless pits of shock, but she was alive. She was here. I put the truck in gear and we drove away from the dark cabin, leaving the door hanging open, the broken picture frame on the floor, and the open wound in our floorboards. The drive to the police station in Solitude was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The storm was still raging, but it felt secondary now, a minor inconvenience. The real storm was inside the truck with us, a silent hurricane of what had just happened and what we had just done. The Solitude Police Department was little more than a one-story barracks attached to the firehouse. I practically fell out of the truck and pounded on the door until a light flickered on inside. A moment later, the door was opened by Sheriff Brody, a man I knew only from a few brief encounters at the general store. He was in his 50s, with a tired face and a belly that strained the buttons of his undershirt. He blinked at me, then at Chloe huddled in the passenger seat, then at the blizzard behind me. "Liam, what in God's name is going on?" "He's in the truck," I said, my teeth chattering from a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "The man from the radio. The man who was in our house. He's in the back of the truck." The look on Brody's face shifted from sleepy confusion to sharp, sober alarm. The rest of the night passed in a fog of procedural necessities. Paramedics came. Brody and another deputy took our statements in a small, beige-colored room that smelled of stale coffee. They gave Chloe a blanket. We told them everything: the calls, the shadow at the tree line, the recordings, the journal, the attack. It sounded insane, even as we said it. When Brody identified the man from his driver's license, he just shook his head. Art Hemlock, he said, more to himself than to us. Lived out on the old logging road his whole life. Kept to himself. Never bothered a soul. Around dawn, as the storm finally began to break, Brody came back into the room. He looked exhausted, and something else. Disturbed. Deeply disturbed. Liam, Chloe, he said, his voice low. We got a warrant. Went out to Hemlock's place. I think you need to see this. He drove us out there himself. Hemlock's cabin was a ramshackle nightmare, barely standing, half buried in old snowdrifts and new. The inside was worse. It was a hoarder's den, stacked to the ceiling with junk, old newspapers, and filth. But amidst the chaos, there was a strange, terrifying order. On one wall, from floor to ceiling, were shelves. And on those shelves were dozens, maybe hundreds, of cassette tapes. Each one was stored in a clear plastic case, with a neat, typewritten label on the spine. Brody swept his flashlight beam across them. I stepped closer, my heart turning to a block of ice. The labels had names and dates. The Abramson family, June 1983 to October 1987. Dr. and Mrs. Peterson, November 1987 to May 1991. The Garza family, summer, 1993 to 1999. And on and on and on. My eyes scanned the rows frantically until they landed on a label near the bottom. The ink was still fresh. Liam and Chloe, November 2023. The entry was unfinished. I felt Chloe's hand grip my arm. These were all the people who had ever lived in our cabin. He had been listening, not just to us, to everyone, for 40 years. This wasn't a random attack. It was a ritual. Our home was his listening post. I felt like I was going to be sick. This man hadn't just invaded our lives, he had collected them. We were just the newest exhibit in his private museum of stolen moments. Then my eyes caught something else. On a small, separate table next to an old reel-to-reel machine, there was another box. A cardboard box with the faded KSKM logo stenciled on the side. It was full of audio tapes, the kind we used at the station. I walked over to it like a zombie, my feet moving without my permission. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Most of the tapes were just labeled with dates. But one, right on top, had a different kind of label. It was handwritten in the same neat script as on the other cassettes. DJ Dave, The Final Show, October 17, 2023. DJ Dave, David Renard, my predecessor, the man who, according to the station manager, had retired suddenly and moved to the lower 48 to be with his family just before I was hired. Brody, I whispered, holding up the tape. My voice was gone. He took it from me, his expression grim. He looked at the tape, then at the old cassette player on the table. Without a word, he walked over, popped open the deck, and slid the tape inside. He pressed play. A crackle of static, and then a voice filled the disgusting, cluttered room. It was unbelievably cheerful. It was Dave, and that was a classic from Creedence, perfect for a chilly October night here in Solitude. We've got a clear sky, a zillion stars out there, and more great tunes coming your way. I'm DJ Dave, and you're listening to KSKM, the voice of the last frontier. Stick around, folks, we'll be right back after this. The jingle for the local hardware store started to play. It cut off abruptly, halfway through. Silence. Not empty silence. The loaded silence of an open mic. For about 5 seconds, there was nothing. My heart was pounding in time with a clock ticking somewhere in the filthy room. And then, it came through the speakers. Low, but perfectly clear. A heavy, labored, rhythmic breathing. It was the same sound. The same frequency. The one that had haunted my nights. The one I had heard on the phone. The one that had filled my living room as I was being choked. I stood there, frozen, staring at the turning spools of the cassette player. It wasn't a random obsession. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the radio. The job. Being the voice of solitude in the dead of night. It was the lure. We hadn't just moved into his house. I had taken his favorite host away. I had taken the job that gave him access. Dave hadn't retired. I was the next one. Chloe and I were next on the tape. The labored breathing continued to hiss from the cheap speakers, a recording of a murder 40 years in the making. It was a silent frequency that had been broadcasting in this town for decades, and I had been the only one stupid enough to tune in. And it would never, ever be quiet again.